Meantime, we're also watching Facebook and the crackdown. The social media giant shutting down popular stock trading group Robinhood stock traders. Its founder calling this a backlash for conversations that buoyed shares of GameStop and other companies this week. Now, Facebook saying that the 157,000 member group was shut down for violating policies, something that the group founder denies. Joining me now, former U.S. Acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker. Lots to talk about when it comes to Facebook. Matt, great to see you this morning. Let's start with this specifically when it comes to Facebook. This is another one of these things. Should they or shouldn't they be imposing these rules on people having conversations? And every time, might I add, when they don't like something, they want to take it down, it's always, well, you violated the rules.
Well, and it's also in coordination with other players in the economy that they seem to work with, whether it's Twitter or whether it's, sort of this Robinhood and GameStop issue that's been going on for the last several days. But, really, at the end of the day, Facebook stands in a very dangerous spot where they can suppress speech, and then this oversight board that they've empowered can look at it after the fact and determine whether that decision to suppress that speech was right. And in 4 or 5 cases this oversight board just looked at, they determined that the algorithm had not properly taken the post down. And so, this, whether it's deplatforming something like this this chat about Robinhood and GameStop, or whether it's deplatforming President Trump's Facebook page. I mean, all these things are very concerning and are really a challenge to free speech and our First Amendment constitutional rights.
Yeah, this is also interesting, and we are talking about that reversal of course, right? Facebook's oversight board directing the company to restore 4 posts that were removed for breaking rules on hate speech, misinformation, and other issues as well. Now, these decisions are the first rulings for the board. This board is supposed to be independent. Its inception came last year. But the rulings do not include Facebook's ban on former President Trump, which the board has 90 days to consider. So your thoughts on how this board is going to operate here? Are they independent? Does Facebook really have to listen to them? And does any of this really matter within the Facebook microcosm?
Well, I know that this board was hand-selected by Facebook, and so to suggest that it's independent from Facebook, I think would, not pass the smell test. But ultimately, this board has some responsibility to, try to apply the freedom, especially in the United States, the freedom of speech, values that we have as Americans. And the further it gets away, the more speech that is suppressed, the more content that is taken down, and the more, sort of companies that are deplatformed and lose large followings, for example, like President Trump's Facebook page. I think this is going to really test the independence of this board, because some of these actions can't be justified and ultimately are going to have to be reversed.
Yeah, Brian, I want to bring you in here because, there's a lot of conversation, too, about should humans be monitoring the content? Should the algorithms be monitoring the content? Then you have some people saying, well, should anybody be monitoring it?
Yeah, and of course, algorithms are just created by humans who have views about speech. So at the end of the day, it is a human decision. Matt, you brought up something earlier that I want to touch on. You talked about the coordinated nature of Twitter and Facebook and others seeming to act together when it comes to these deplatforming. I'm wondering, from a legal standpoint, do you see this going somewhere? I mean, could it be the case that we could actually get some legal action as a result of lawsuits in these situations where it looks to the average person like there's some kind of coordination really going on here when it comes to speech?
No, you're absolutely right. And I mean, let's look at what just happened over the last several days with the Reddit GameStop movement. Investors on Wall Street, the big boys, were getting crushed by some of these short squeeze plays that were being executed by, Facebook groups and Reddit chat boards. And so what happened is a lot of these players moved in, whether it was Robinhood and other brokerages restricting the trading of those shares that you could only sell and you couldn't buy, or other moves in a coordinated manner to try to bring down and let some of the shorts cover and let the market settle down a little bit. And so I think there's that, plus the Facebook and Twitter at the same time coordinating the banning of President Trump's Twitter and Facebook accounts. I think all of these things do create legal exposure for these companies, there has to be a balancing of the free speech and the ability to use these platforms to communicate, and at the same time, these companies really, it all boils down to the Section 230 immunity that they've been given that Congress has to look at and restructure.
And Matt, when it comes to legal considerations and implications on a company, of course, I want to bring in James Freeman because there are financial implications there too.
Yeah, I guess in terms of consumer remedies, Matt, I'm wondering, obviously these companies are free to set whatever policies they want, but do you see a litigation potential for consumers saying you're not consistently applying your standards, Facebook? You're using these terms of service selectively against people with a particular point of view.
Yeah, and the terms of service are uniquely vague as well, and that's, I think, the biggest challenge in trying to go after these companies for violating their own terms of service is they can amend those terms of service at any time. And again, they're so vague that to actually launch a challenge to that is probably not going to be successful. I've always complained about these companies that get so big and then they come to Washington and use their lobbyists and lawyers to get a regulatory scheme that then protects their franchise. And I think we're seeing that with social media right now, whether it's Google, Facebook, Twitter, and others, where Mark Zuckerberg, for example, has asked and is begging the government to regulate him more because that keeps other players and destructive technologies of the future from taking their franchise away or competing.
Interesting when Zuckerberg is saying we need more regulation. Matt Whitaker, great to see you this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, coming up, General Motors, green future, details on